8 years ago, my ex, Carol, and I broke up right after our twins were born. We hadn't been together for long, only about 14 months when she found out she was pregnant. We both panicked and thought maybe we should try to make it work for the sake of the kids. You know how it goes, thinking the relationship will just fall into place because of the family side of it. I'll admit, we weren't exactly compatible from the start. There were some good times, sure, but it wasn't a deep, long-lasting connection. When she got pregnant, I thought maybe we could push through and make it work, but we were about as compatible as chalk and cheese. Despite that, for the kids' sake, we gave it our best shot for a while. Things were okay, nothing huge, just the usual arguments, but we co-parented well enough and didn't let things escalate. We weren't at each other's throats. Then, Carol met someone new. She thought he was someone she could have a future with, and I understood. She wanted a fresh start, something different from what we had. She was upfront about it, and we both agreed that splitting up was the best option. I can't say I was heartbroken because, honestly, the relationship wasn't solid to begin with, but we ended things as amicably as possible. After that, we fell into a rhythm with co-parenting. Things were smooth, or as smooth as they can be when you're raising kids in separate homes. We split time evenly, kept communication focused on the kids, and co-parented decently. Neither of us wanted the twins to feel any tension, so we made a real effort to make it work. The kids got time with both of us, and there was no child support since we split everything evenly. Then, about 2 years after the breakup, Carol met her now husband. This guy wasn't the one she started dating right after we split, though. He was someone new. The interesting part was that he had a daughter the same age as our twins. Carol told me about him and how serious they were getting. I wanted to support it for the kids' sake, to make things easier for them. I was okay with the idea of my twins having another father figure around, but things started to shift when Carol brought up including her stepdaughter in the same way we included our twins in everything. She casually mentioned that it would be nice if we could all do things as one big family. At first, it seemed harmless enough. I thought she was just trying to blend the families. But it started to feel a little strange when she began suggesting I treat her stepdaughter like she was my own. Let me be clear, I've got nothing against her stepdaughter. She's just a kid caught in the middle of all this. But Carol seemed to think that because we were all connected through the twins, I was somehow obligated to include her stepdaughter in every activity or outing I had with my kids. When we first discussed it, I told her that while I understood wanting to include everyone, it wasn't my responsibility to act as a dad to her new husband's kid. I was already busy being a good dad to my twins, but Carol kept pushing the idea. I tried not to get frustrated. It's tricky co-parenting, trying to balance your family's needs while keeping the peace with an ex and their new partner. But the expectations just kept building. Things took a turn when she started expecting me to babysit her stepdaughter whenever I had my twins. If I planned a weekend activity with my kids, she'd call and ask if I could bring along her stepdaughter. I didn't mind occasionally, but it became an expectation. Don't get me wrong, I have no problem helping out now and then, but I didn't sign up to be a third parent to her husband's kid. Honestly, I didn't see how it was fair to me, or even to my own kids. After a while, I realized that whenever I planned something special for my twins, it would somehow turn into a thing about all the other kids in her household. It felt like I wasn't allowed to have time alone with my own kids anymore. And when I bought gifts or planned surprise outings, I'd hear about how it wasn't fair if her stepdaughter wasn't included in the same way. She even got upset once because I didn't spend as much on a gift for her stepdaughter as I did for our twins. I had to draw the line somewhere, so I decided to focus my time and resources on my twins. I explained this to her, and predictably, it didn't go over well. She called me selfish and said I wasn't supporting her whole family. She wanted this big blended family, but that wasn't something I had signed up for. I told her that while I wanted my twins to feel like they belonged, it didn't mean I had to treat kids who weren't mine the same way. She wasn't happy about it, but we managed to keep things civil enough to continue co-parenting. Since that conversation, we've been more parallel parenting than co-parenting, if that makes sense. We stick to our own time with the kids and rarely do anything together as one big family. We don't share plans or mix the kids from her house with mine. It keeps things simple, and for me, it lets me focus on my own kids without all these extra expectations. But still, every now and then, she'll bring it up, trying to make me feel guilty for not jumping in to help raise all the kids under her roof. Over the years, the situation with her family has only gotten more complicated. She and her husband had a baby together, and later on, they took in her husband's nephew. So now, at her place, there's my twins, their stepsister, a step-cousin, and a half-sister. Carol tries to keep everyone as one big happy family, but I've made it clear that my role is with my kids, and that's it. So yeah, it's complicated. Every time I think we've hit a point where things are settled, something new comes up. But I've stuck to my boundaries, and I don't think it's unreasonable to focus on the two kids who are actually mine. It's one thing to support her decisions as a mother, but it's another to be expected to parent everyone under her roof. Now, fast forward a bit, and here's where things really started to go off the rails. With all the added members in Carol's household, it's been harder and harder to keep my boundaries steady. At first, we managed to find a balance where I was doing my part as a dad without getting too wrapped up in her new family situation. But as time went on, Carol's expectations kept growing, and it felt like every few months there was something new she wanted me to help with. Whether it was her stepdaughter, her husband's nephew, or their baby together. It was like they kept adding more layers, and somehow I was supposed to take on some of that burden. Then came the whole school trip situation. The school my kids go to is on the smaller side, so they're in a mixed-age class. This also means they're in the same class as their stepsister and step-cousin, which is fine. It's a bit unusual, but it works for the school and doesn't bother me. What I didn't expect, though, was how it would turn into a huge issue with Carol and her husband about what I was supposed to pay for. This wasn't just any small field trip. It was a big deal for the kids. The school was planning a visit to an interactive museum, with workshops and hands-on learning, and it sounded amazing. The trip was pricey, but my twins were super excited, and it seemed like something that would create great memories for them. I could afford it, so I decided to go ahead and pay for them. I mentioned it to Carol, thinking she'd be happy that the twins were getting this experience. But when I brought it up, she got oddly quiet and then flat out said that if the other kids couldn't go too, it wouldn't be fair. At first, I thought she was joking. There's no way she actually expected me to pay for the other two, right? But no, she was dead serious. She said it wasn't right for my kids to go on this luxury trip if her other kids couldn't go as well. I tried to stay calm and told her I was paying for my twins because they were my responsibility. I even suggested that maybe she and her husband could fundraise or save up for the other kids if it was so important to them. But then she hit me with the whole, think about how they'll feel watching your kids go while they stay behind argument. She claimed the whole household would fall apart if the kids didn't all have the same experience. And that's when things started to get really heated. Then her husband jumps in, saying it's unfair to treat the kids differently. Now, I'm all for fairness, but there's a limit. His stepdaughter and nephew aren't my responsibility, and I'm not made of money. So I asked him straight up, why is it my job to pay for all the kids in your house? He just gave me this look like I was the one being selfish. Then he goes off on a rant about how they're all supposed to be siblings and how I'm sabotaging their family. Look, I get it. No kid wants to be left out. But at some point, they have to realize I'm not their dad. Carol made the decision to bring in these other kids, and now she has this whole new family setup. That's her choice, but I'm not going to be guilt-tripped into paying for every single kid she takes in. What really set me off, though, was when they started making it sound like I was being cruel. They said this would damage the kids' relationships, and if our twins and their stepsister grew apart because of it, it would be my fault. I mean, come on. I'm just a dad trying to do something nice for my kids, and somehow it's turned into this big family drama about what I'm not doing for kids that aren't even mine. So I said, look, I don't think it's fair to expect me to cover everyone's expenses. This trip is a treat for our twins. It's during my time with them, and I want them to go. I don't see how that's being unfair to anyone. But Carol just kept going, saying that if our twins go and the other kids don't, they'll feel like they're being treated as less than, and I should care about that. Her husband even tried to bring up family unity and said if the kids end up resenting each other, it'll be my fault. At that point, I was honestly just over it. This isn't about family unity. It's about them trying to make their financial choices my problem. It's not like they're struggling either. They have decent jobs. If this trip means that much to them, they could find a way to make it work without relying on me. I'm not responsible for stretching my finances to make up for what they can't or won't do. The whole argument just kept going in circles. They kept insisting how unfair it was and how I should think about the family, but I stood my ground. I told them it wasn't my fault they couldn't afford to send the other kids, and I wasn't going to let them guilt-trip me into paying for it. That's where we left it. But I could tell from the look on Carol's face that this wasn't over. Honestly, I walked away from that conversation feeling both irritated and confused. No matter how much I tried to explain that I wasn't responsible for all her family's kids, they just weren't hearing it. Somehow, my focus on my own kids had become an issue, and I was being painted as the villain in their family drama. It's honestly exhausting. I just wanted to do something nice for my twins, and now it's this massive issue about fairness and family unity. It feels like I'm walking a tightrope where every little decision could spark another argument. All I wanted was to give my kids a fun experience, but apparently, that's too much to ask. So after the whole argument about the school trip, I thought that would be the end of it, at least for now. I thought I'd made it clear I wasn't paying for all the kids, and I hoped Carol and her husband would just drop it. But nope, they weren't about to let it go without another round. What happened next completely threw me off guard. A few days after the trip argument, I get a message from Carol saying she wants to meet up to talk. I knew this wasn't going to be a friendly chat, but I figured it was better to get it over with than keep going back and forth through text. I agreed, and we set a time to meet at this small diner that was about halfway between our places. She showed up, and right away, I could tell this wasn't going to be a quick chat. She had that serious look on her face, the one where you know they've rehearsed what they're going to say. She sat down and immediately started with, "I don't think you're understanding the situation," and I was thinking, I think I understand it just fine. I'm paying for my kids, and that's it. But I let her talk. She went on about how I needed to look at the bigger picture and how this wasn't just about a school trip. It was about setting a standard for how we'll handle things going forward. I guess she thought if she framed it as this big family philosophy, I'd feel obligated to agree. Then she started saying how this trip was just one example and that in the future, there would be other activities, events, maybe even family vacations, and we needed to be on the same page about treating all the kids equally. I couldn't believe it. I was thinking, is she seriously suggesting that I pay for family vacations for all her kids now? But I just listened, trying not to react too much because I knew that if I got too heated, it would only make things worse. Then she brings up the fairness argument again, saying that if my kids get to do these things and the others don't, it will cause resentment. She even went as far as saying it could damage the kids' relationships with each other, that they would grow up feeling unequal and it would tear them apart. I was sitting there thinking, they're already different kids from different families, with different lives. Why is this suddenly my problem to solve? When she finished, I tried to keep my voice calm and told her that I understood she wanted all the kids to feel equal, but these weren't my kids, and they weren't my responsibility. I reminded her that we've been doing this parallel parenting thing for a while now. She handles things on her end, and I handle things on mine, but apparently, that wasn't enough anymore. That's when she dropped the real kicker. If you really cared about the kids' well-being, you'd want to support the whole family, not just your kids. She kept going on about how I needed to show good faith by stepping up for the other kids as well. I almost laughed out loud because it felt so absurd. Since when did supporting my kids mean taking on everyone else's kids too? At that point, I felt myself starting to lose it. I told her, look, I do care about my kids' well-being. That's why I'm willing to do these things for them. But I'm not going to let you guilt-trip me into paying for kids that aren't mine. She didn't like that one bit. She got defensive and said I was being selfish and not thinking about how this would affect the kids in the long run. I fired back, how is it selfish to just take care of my own kids? You made the choice to add these other kids into your household. That's not on me. Then her husband showed up. I'm not sure if she planned for him to just happen to stop by, but suddenly he was there, walking over to our table. He barely even acknowledged me and just went straight to Carol, like he was about to save the day or something. He sits down and immediately starts in on me, like he's been waiting for this moment. He says, I don't think you're being fair. We're supposed to be creating a family here, and your actions are putting up barriers. I just stared at him for a second, wondering if he really thought I'd buy into this whole we're all family thing when it came to my wallet. So, I told him straight up, I'm here to support my twins. That's what I signed up for. You can't just expect me to pretend all these other kids are mine financially. Then he hits me with, well, if the kids start hating each other, that's on you. You're the one creating division. That set me off. I told him, you're the one pushing for me to play dad to kids that aren't mine. I'm not the one making this complicated. I just want to do right by my twins, and that's it. I didn't care if he thought I was being cold. At that point, I felt like they were both trying to gang up on me, making me feel like the bad guy just for having boundaries. Things got a little heated after that. Adu starts saying that if the kids grow up resenting each other, it'll all be because I didn't care enough to support their family vision. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I told her, if that's the case, maybe you and your husband need to figure out a way to handle it. But don't put it all on me. By this point, people in the diner were definitely giving us looks, but honestly, I didn't care. I was so fed up with being made to feel like the villain in this whole situation. I just wanted to do something nice for my kids, and somehow, it had spiraled into this giant mess about what I owed to her household. It felt like they expected me to blindly fund whatever came up for every kid under their roof, just because they decided to blend their families. I finally stood up and said, look, I've said my piece. My focus is on my twins, and that's not changing. If you want everything to be equal, then maybe you need to take a look at what you guys are doing, not what I'm doing. But I'm done being the bad guy here. With that, I walked out, feeling a mix of frustration and relief. It was clear to me that no matter what I said, they weren't going to get it. As I left, I could still feel their eyes on me, like they were just waiting for me to give in and agree to their terms. But at that point, I was done. I'd set my boundaries, and I wasn't about to let them push me into something I didn't sign up for. It's one thing to want your kids to feel like part of a family, but it's another to expect someone else to foot the bill for it. After that disaster of a conversation at the diner, I thought things might finally cool down. I thought that after the diner incident, Carol and her husband would get the point and drop it. But I should have known better. Things didn't just disappear. They actually got worse. A few days later, I started getting long-winded texts from her family members. It started with her sister, who had always been pretty chill and stayed out of our issues before. But suddenly, she was texting me about how important it was for the kids to feel like one big family. She said things like, if you really cared about your kids' happiness, you'd be willing to do this for them. It felt like she was implying I was doing something wrong just because I didn't want to pay for her sister's stepkids. I tried to ignore it, hoping she'd let it go, but the messages kept coming, and they weren't getting any kinder. What started as subtle suggestions quickly turned into flat-out accusations. I was suddenly selfish, stingy, and not thinking about the bigger picture. They acted like I was tearing apart some happy family just because I didn't want to fund a trip for a couple of kids who weren't mine. Her family seemed to treat it like I declared war on them all for simply setting a boundary. Then it got worse. Carol's mom decided to call me. I hadn't spoken to her in a while, and I was surprised to see her name pop up. I figured maybe she wanted to talk about the twins or have a calm discussion. But no, this call was something else entirely. She went straight into a speech about how things should be. She told me that if I just paid for all the kids, this wouldn't be an issue. She said I needed to think about how much better everything would be if I were more involved with all the children. My patience was starting to wear thin, but I replied, with all due respect, those kids are not my responsibility. I'm doing right by my own kids, and that's what I signed up for. She kept going, saying things like, a good man steps up and takes care of the whole family, not just his own. I was floored. I tried to explain that while I wanted the best for my twins, it didn't mean I had to financially support every kid her daughter brought into the household. I told her, look, I'm not going to feel bad for taking care of my own kids and setting boundaries, but it was like she wasn't even listening. The conversation just spiraled from there, with her repeating herself and pushing the guilt card hard, talking about how it was my duty as a father and how the kids would suffer. By the end of the call, I was done. I told her we clearly weren't going to agree, and I politely ended the conversation. But the pressure didn't stop. Over the next week or so, it felt like they were rallying the whole family against me. Carol's brother even left a passive-aggressive comment on one of my social media posts about being a dad. He wrote, real dads support their families no matter what. It was clear he wasn't just talking about my kids. I didn't even respond. I just deleted the comment and moved on, but I won't lie. It annoyed me. Here I was, doing my best for my twins, and somehow, I was being painted as the bad guy in their eyes. One day, after I dropped the kids off at a daycare, I was heading back to my car when her husband caught up to me. He didn't greet me or make small talk. He just jumped straight into it, saying, you know you're hurting the kids with this. I was honestly taken aback. I thought we'd already talked this through, but clearly, he wasn't done. He started going on about how my decision not to pay for all the kids was driving a wedge between the siblings, and that I needed to be more considerate of the family dynamic. I told him, look, I'm not hurting anyone. I'm taking care of my kids. They're not the ones struggling here. But he wouldn't let it go. He kept going on about how everyone in the family thought I was being unfair, and that it was only a matter of time before the kids would pick up on it and start resenting each other. It felt like he was trying to place the weight of the family's happiness on my shoulders, and I wasn't having it. I told him, your family's opinion doesn't change my responsibilities. I'm not their dad. I'm here for my kids, and that's not going to change. Honestly, at that point, I didn't know what else to say. No matter what I did, it seemed like they were always going to see me as the villain in their family drama. That night, I sat down, trying to figure out how things had gotten to this point. All I wanted was to take care of my kids and give them good experiences. Yet somehow, I was being painted as a cold-hearted guy who didn't care about family unity. It was like they couldn't understand the line between what was fair and what wasn't. I ended up venting to a couple of close friends about it. They couldn't believe the pressure Carol's family was putting on me. One of my friends even joked that if they were so concerned about the kids missing out, they could all chip in and fund the trip themselves. It made me laugh, but at the same time, it was frustrating. It felt like her whole family had decided I was obligated to be an all-in parent to kids who weren't mine, and for what? just to keep the peace with people who clearly weren't respecting my boundaries. The whole thing left a bad taste in my mouth. I was getting texts and calls from random family members, all pushing the same line, and I was so over it. It felt like they had built up this idea that I owed them something, and they weren't going to drop it until I caved. By the end of the week, I realized trying to reason with them was pointless. They weren't looking for an explanation. They were looking for me to fall in line. I told myself I wasn't going to let them wear me down. My kids are my responsibility, and I wasn't going to let this extended family guilt trip change that. It's crazy to think that all this started for me just trying to pay for my kids' school trip, but now it's turned into a battle over who's doing enough for the whole family. They may not like it, but I know where I stand after a week of nonstop messages, unsolicited advice, and guilt trips from Carol's family. I decided it was time to draw a firm line on my boundaries and stick to them. No exceptions. By that point, I was done. It was clear to me that no matter how much I explained myself, they weren't going to understand. They were all fixated on this idea of a big, happy family, and apparently, I was the one standing in the way because I refused to pay for every single kid they added to their household. The first thing I did was talk to my twins about the upcoming trip. I wanted to make sure they were still excited and didn't feel awkward because of all the drama. I didn't want them to feel guilty or responsible for any of it. I kept it simple and told them, hey, I'm really looking forward to this trip for you guys, and I want you to know that this is something special for just the two of you. I didn't go into the messy details, but I needed them to understand it was okay for them to enjoy something just for themselves. They both seemed relieved. They definitely picked up on some tension. Kids always do, but they seemed happy and excited about the trip. I could tell they didn't feel bad about it, and that was a huge weight off my shoulders. I wanted them to know they deserved nice experiences without feeling responsible for anyone else. With that settled, I knew I needed to set a clear, firm boundary with Carol and her family. Not just a vague, I'm only paying for my kids kind of boundary, but a real, unmistakable line they'd understand. So, I called Carol. I kept it calm and straightforward because I didn't want this turning into another long, drawn-out argument. I basically told her, look, my role as a parent is to support my twins. I'm here for them, and I'm doing what I can to give them good experiences, but that doesn't extend to other children who aren't mine. I respect your choices and your family, but my financial responsibility ends with my twins. Of course, Carol wasn't thrilled. She immediately started in on how the other kids would feel and how it wasn't fair for siblings to have different experiences. I let her talk, but as soon as she started down the guilt trip road again, I stopped her. I said, I understand how you feel, but this is my final decision. I'm not going to be paying for any extra expenses outside of our twins. I told her if she wanted to work something out for her household, that was up to her, but she needed to stop putting pressure on me. There was silence for a few moments, and I could tell she was furious, but I wasn't going to budge. I could almost feel her gearing up to make one last attempt, but she must have realized it wasn't going to work. She ended up saying something like, fine, I guess you've made your choice, in a tone that was clearly meant to make me feel guilty, but I didn't. By that point, I felt more relief than anything else. I was done explaining myself. After that, things quieted down. No more random messages from her family, no more passive-aggressive comments, just silence. It was a bit awkward, but it felt good to finally have some peace. I think they finally realized I wasn't going to give in to their demands, and they just had to accept it. In the weeks leading up to the trip, I made sure to spend extra time with the twins, doing simple, normal things to keep everything feeling grounded. We'd grab a bite, go to the park, watch movies, just the usual stuff. I wanted them to feel secure and happy, not caught up in whatever issues the adults were dealing with. Honestly, it was refreshing to focus on them without any added drama. Then, the day of the trip came. I dropped them off at school that morning, and they were all smiles, ready to go. It was great to see them so excited after everything that had happened. As they ran off to join their friends, I felt a real sense of satisfaction. It wasn't about making everyone happy or bending over backward for people who didn't appreciate it. It was about giving my kids the best I could and teaching them that it's okay to set boundaries. Here's the kicker. The day after the trip, I got a call from Carol. I was expecting some snarky comment or passive-aggressive remark, but instead, she just asked if the kids had fun. I told her they did and kept it short because I didn't want to reopen old arguments. But then, she surprised me. She actually thanked me for standing by what I believed was right. She said, I didn't agree with you, but I respect that you stood up for yourself and your kids. I was honestly shocked. I didn't expect her to come around, but there it was. It wasn't an apology, but it felt like some kind of acknowledgement that maybe I wasn't the villain they'd all painted me to be. Since then, things have been much more peaceful. I don't hear anything from her family anymore, and it feels like we've reached a new level of understanding. We might not agree on everything, but we've both accepted our roles in the kids' lives. And honestly, I think it's made me a better dad. Now, I'm not constantly second-guessing every decision, wondering how it'll affect her household. I'm just focused on what's best for my twins. In the end, this whole situation taught me something important. Setting boundaries isn't just about saying no to others, it's also about saying yes to my own peace of mind. I've learned it's okay to prioritize my own family and not feel guilty about it. If others don't get it, that's their problem, not mine. So, yeah, things are in a good place now. The twins are happy, I'm happy, and it feels like we're finally moving forward without all the extra baggage. I've made it clear where I stand, and I think even Carol and her husband have come to respect that. It's not perfect, and I'm sure there will be bumps down the road, but at least now I know I can stand my ground and make decisions that are best for my family without getting lost in everyone else's expectations. A few weeks after things had settled down, I thought maybe I had heard the last of the demands. But then Carol hit me with something new. She started talking about the twins' living situation at her place, saying they didn't have the same comforts they had with me. At first, I thought she was just venting, but then she started hinting that I should do something about it. Turns out, she wanted me to buy a house. Not for me, but for them. She said it wasn't fair for the kids to go back and forth between two totally different living standards, and that it could hurt their self-esteem if they felt like they were lacking at her place. I was trying to process if she was serious, and yep, she was dead serious. She actually expected me to buy a second house for the kids to stay in when they were with her, so she could live in it too, all at my expense. I tried to stay calm but had to ask, how does that make any sense? You already have a home. She went off about how their house was too small for a family her size and how it was affecting the kids' mental well-being. She was talking about equal standards like I was supposed to make up for every choice she's made since we split up. When I told her that wasn't happening, she pulled every guilt trip in the book. She said, "Don't you want the kids to feel just as comfortable at my place as they do with you? And it's unfair that I'm not willing to provide for their full living experience." She acted like I was some cold-hearted jerk for not wanting to buy her family a new house. At this point, I was done. I told her, the twins have everything they need at your place. If you think they need a bigger house, that's something you and your husband can handle. I'm not responsible for upgrading your home. There was a brief silence, and then she snapped back with, well, if the kids end up feeling like they have a real home only with you, that'll be on you. I just shook my head, and that was the end of the conversation. I don't know how she thought this was a reasonable request. I want the best for my kids, but that doesn't mean I'm buying her a whole new lifestyle. I guess there's no limit to what she'll ask for, but at least I'm clear now. I've drawn the line, and I'm not budging. After Carol's latest demand for a second house, I knew I couldn't just let this situation continue without taking some real action. I'd already made it clear to her where I stood, but I also needed to make sure I had concrete proof in case things escalated further. So, I decided to record the conversation. I wasn't planning on using it right away, but I figured I should cover my bases. I set my phone to record as she started in on her ridiculous request, and I made sure to stay calm and collected, just as I had in our earlier talks. Within a week she called again, and this time she was more aggressive, but I kept my voice steady. "Carol," I said, "this doesn't make sense. You already have a home. If you're unhappy with it, that's on you, not me. I'm not responsible for upgrading your entire life. If your husband does not earn much, that is not my fault." She pushed back hard, trying to guilt me into agreeing. "It's not just for me," she argued. "It's for the kids. Don't you care about their well-being? They need to feel stable, and I can't provide that if I don't have a bigger house for them to live in." I could feel my blood starting to boil, but I stayed focused. "So, you agree that you cannot bring up my kids in that house?" I said firmly. "I'm not buying you a new house. That's not happening." She threw in one final guilt trip. "Well, if the kids grow up feeling like they only have a real home with you, that's on you, not me." I shook my head, trying to keep my composure. If they need to have a better home, then why should I not have the full custody? But buying you a new house, that's not going to happen. This conversation is over. I didn't say anything more after that. I knew I had to take action now. A few days later, I consulted with a lawyer. I wanted to make sure I was fully prepared to protect my kids. The lawyer listened to my side, and then we discussed how best to approach this situation, especially with Carol's ongoing demands and the impact they were having on my twins. "We need to gather proof," my lawyer advised. "Not just of Carol's unreasonable requests, but also of her and her husband's ability to provide a stable environment for your kids. If you have any recorded incidents or communications like this one, It could be crucial in court. I took the lawyer's advice seriously. I gathered all the messages, emails, and texts where Carol had made similar demands. I even provided proof of how she had been trying to guilt-trip me for years, especially around the financial responsibilities for the children. I also documented other incidents where I had concerns about Carol and her husband's ability to meet the twins' needs, both emotionally and financially. It wasn't long before the custody case was filed in court. When the hearing day finally arrived, I was prepared. I had the recordings, messages, and documents laid out. My lawyer presented everything in a clear, organized way, showing how Carol had been pressuring me for financial contributions beyond my obligation as a father. We also highlighted the fact that Carol and her husband's living situation was unstable, with constant financial struggles, and that they had a history of making poor decisions that affected the kids' well-being. Carol, of course, fought back. She stood up in court with a tearful expression, trying to paint herself as the concerned mother. "Your Honor," she said, "I've been trying my best to give my kids a good life, but my ex-husband refuses to help me provide for them. How can they feel secure when they're forced to live in two separate worlds? I'm doing everything I can to make their lives better, but he won't support us." The judge listened patiently but remained unfazed. "Ms. Carol, it's clear that the financial and emotional stability of your household is questionable at best. You've made several demands of your ex-husband that are beyond reasonable, and we've seen evidence of attempts to manipulate him into supporting your household beyond your responsibilities. It is apparent that your ex-husband has provided a more stable and secure environment for the children." Carol's face twisted in frustration as she shot back. "But they need to feel safe. They deserve to have the same comforts at my place as they do with him. It's not fair." The judge, not missing a beat, replied, "You're asking for more than what is fair to expect from your ex-husband. You have to understand that your responsibilities as a parent are your own. Your ex has made it clear that he is willing to support the children financially, but you are asking for more than what is his duty." At that point, the judge turned to my twins, who were present in the courtroom, sitting quietly. The judge asked them, "How do you feel about your living situation? Do you feel more comfortable at your father's home, or do you feel comfortable at your mother's house?" The twins, though nervous, were honest in their responses. "I feel happy with Dad," my son said. "It's fun, and he makes sure we're okay." My daughter nodded in agreement, adding, "I like it at Dad's too. We get to do things together, and it feels like a safe place." The judge looked back at Carol, unimpressed. "It seems clear that your children are thriving in their father's care and have expressed no desire for a different living situation. I also see no evidence that you're able to provide the same level of stability for them at this time." Carol tried one last attempt. "But they need me. I'm their mother." The judge calmly responded, "I understand that, Miss Carol, but your actions have shown a pattern of putting your financial strain on your ex-husband, while he has provided a more stable, supportive environment for the children. It's in their best interests to remain with their father." The judge slammed the gavel down. "The children will remain in their father's custody. There will be no further financial obligations expected of Mr. White beyond what he has already agreed to." Carol's face fell, and she stood there for a moment, stunned. She didn't say anything as she sat down, and I could feel the weight lifting off my shoulders. The decision was made. The twins were staying with me, where they felt safe, and I didn't have to keep second-guessing every move I made. As I left the courtroom, I knew it wasn't going to be easy, but it felt like the right decision. I wasn't about to let anyone dictate what was best for my kids, especially when their well-being was already being taken care of. Carol might have fought hard, but the court saw through it all. And now, my kids could finally be in a place where they could thrive without anyone trying to tear that down. A few months after the court hearing, things for Carol started unraveling. It wasn't long before the cracks in her marriage became impossible to ignore. She had always been focused on trying to get me to support her and her family, but now it was her own husband who was causing chaos in her life. Carol had caught him cheating on her, and when she confronted him about it, the situation took a violent turn. One evening, Carol discovered messages on her husband's phone, confirming her worst suspicions. She confronted him in their living room, demanding answers. "How could you do this to me? After everything I've done for you? For us?" she yelled, holding the phone in front of his face. Her husband, furious, didn't say a word at first. Then, without warning, he lunged at her. "You think you're better than me? You don't know what I've been through," he shouted, slapping the phone from her hand and pushing her back against the wall. His anger escalated quickly, and before long, he was physically assaulting her, throwing punches and knocking her to the floor. Carol barely had time to react. She had tried to call for help, but he quickly snatched the phone from her hands and broke it. The violence was overwhelming, and Carol ended up with bruises and cuts all over her face and body. He finally stormed out of the house, leaving her bleeding and battered on the floor. Carol ended up in the hospital that night, and when the authorities arrived, her husband was arrested for assault. The police took him into custody, and he was charged with domestic violence. The whole thing had been a nightmare for Carol, and it felt like her life was crashing down around her. She was shaken, terrified, and unsure of what her future would hold. A few weeks later, Carol filed for divorce, and the legal proceedings went smoothly. Her husband was in jail, and she had the support of her family. She moved back in with her mother, trying to recover from the trauma of the last few months. The divorce was finalized, but it didn't take long for Carol to reach out to me. One evening, I got an unexpected call. The caller ID showed it was Carol. I had been expecting something like this, but I wasn't ready for the flood of emotions that came rushing back. I picked up the phone, trying to keep my composure. "Hey," she said softly, sounding tired and vulnerable. "I know we haven't talked in a while, but I really need to talk to you. Things have been so messed up with my marriage. I don't know what to do. Can you take me back? I've learned a lot, and I realize now how much I messed up with you. You're the only one who ever really understood me. I need you back." I felt a wave of frustration wash over me. The anger, the guilt, the manipulation. All the things she'd done to try to get me back into her life when we were still married. But now, it was different. She was broken and vulnerable, but I had moved on. I had my kids, my peace of mind, and my priorities were clear. "Carol," I said, my voice steady but firm, "I'm not doing this. You had your chance. We've been through so much, and I can't just erase all the damage you've done. You've hurt me, you've hurt the kids, and you've done things that can't be fixed. I'm not going to go back to that. You need to sort your life out, and I'm not part of that anymore. I'm sorry, but I'm not coming back." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear her breathing heavily, the sound of her frustration and disappointment creeping through. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she finally said, her voice small. I don't know where to turn. I've made so many mistakes, and now I'm left with nothing. Can't you at least give me another chance?" I shook my head, even though she couldn't see it. "I can't, Carol. I've been there. You've already shown me who you really are, and I've learned my lesson. It's time for you to learn yours. I'm not your fallback anymore. I've moved on, and you should too." With that, I hung up the phone. It wasn't easy, but it was the right thing to do. I couldn't go back to a woman who had caused so much pain in my life and in the lives of my children. She had made her choices, and now she had to live with the consequences. I was done being part of her drama. I had my family, and that's all I needed to focus on. The next few weeks passed, and I didn't hear from her again. I didn't know what was going on in her life, and honestly, I didn't care. I had finally drawn the line, and I wasn't going to let anyone pull me back into their toxic mess. Carol needed to face her reality, and I was going to keep moving forward for the sake of my kids and myself. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.